All right, we're on episode 8. Man, this surprised me because it has no writing on this. I did some research as I've done on all these. It looks like March 1996. Tank Abbott. I know you're with the MMA and everything, but at this time, how did you get Tank Abbott to sit down with you?
Wait, I don't even remember doing Cassette Wrestling News in 96. Is it really Cassette Wrestling News, or was it just an interview with Tank?
Man, I don't know. It had to be. It was right there in 1996. It's on a cassette because of what he's talking about. So I don't know if you did an interview with him some other way or for something else. But
I tell you what, I transitioned to a newsletter, and I'm like, man, what can I call a shoot news? I go, I'm gonna call this Hook and Shoot because it's hooking and shooting and all that shit. And the funny thing, man, Tank, I will never forget. He's like, I'll never do that fake shit. And he would go off and talk about how stupid wrestling was. And then I walk in, he's at a UFC right when he signs with WCW. And he had this defeated look on his face when I walked over to him. He's like, man, it's $7,500 a week, man. I got to do this. And I'm like, hey, I ain't going to fault you for making $7,500 a week for what, 3 years or 5 years? They still paid him a year or two after he was off of television. They paid him $7,500 a week. And he goes, you know, all this stuff's fake, but I'll give you an exclusive. I don't know if he said this on this one, but he goes, all those fights I lost, they were all fake.
I don't know if he says that, but he alludes to him getting like trying to work somebody and him getting in a real fight and all this kind of stuff. It's real interesting because I'm not saying that it was a shoot interview, but it was him just sitting down with you talking, and I really enjoyed it. Not much I could say about it. I want everyone just to sit back and listen. If you're a Patreon member, if you're listen to this on the main feed, give us some feedback. What do you think about Jeff sitting here? Now, this is 1996, and we're using it as Cassette Wrestling News, but it was more like when you were doing your MMA stuff. But what the hell? We'll give him a Tank Abbott interview. What about that? So that's episode 8, guys. You know, you get them early by Patreon, and sit back and enjoy Tank Abbott.
March the 19th, 1996. Tank Abbott. Okay, hold on one second. Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you. Barely.
Oh, but I'll get up closer here. Okay, first I wanted to know exactly, and I've heard other people's sides of the story about what happened at the last UFC between you and Alan Goez.
Up in Puerto Rico?
Yeah.
Oh, let's see here. I would say after his fighter Marrera was fighting, I was calling Marrera a pussy the whole time because he basically put his tail between his legs and ran. And I guess he didn't like that. And so he came up and started heckling me, kind of. And I did my best at ignoring him, but I can't let that happen. So basically, I, after the Chemo Shamrock fight, approached him and asked him if he had anything else to say. And I don't think he was expecting any retaliation or any offensive part on my behalf because it was on TV, and I think he thought it was a safe place to slap off. But as you know, I'm not that kind of person, and he basically didn't have anything. I called him a bitch, and he hid behind his manager and said, fuck you, and so I attempted to punch him over his manager's shoulder, and then he tried to tackle me, and I threw him into the octagon and hit him in the back of the head, and he ran like a little girl that he is.
Would you like to fight him someday, or?
and it doesn't matter to me. It's like asking me if I want to fight my sister. It doesn't. He's not really much of a. Yeah, I'd like to fight him. Who cares? I like to fight anyone, actually. So I don't get in trouble.
Now, I heard something this past week. I haven't talked to SEG for a couple of weeks that you may have been suspended.
Yeah, they suspended me. And I got out of line with a few of their people, which I shouldn't have done. But, c'est la vie, I guess.
Yeah. Was there... I also heard something to the effect that you and John McCarthy had words or something like that.
No, I was pretty upset after the fight with Alon Goes, and his wife, me and her, our paths crossed. You know how she puts all the shows together?
Yeah.
And she was verbalizing things to me, and I was verbalizing things to her. And I said some things that heat in the moment to her that I really shouldn't have said. And basically, I regret saying them at this point in time, because she is a nice lady, and I shouldn't have said all that kind of stuff to her.
When do you think you're going to be back in UFC or any other event for that matter?
Well, that's basically up to Bob Meyerowitz and the organization there, and see what they're up to, and I would imagine I'll be back sometime in the future. I mean, just it's a matter of time, basically.
Now, there was something that was bothering me that this has been all over the internet and everything, that possibly the government officials that are trying to ban events like this would use your past record against these type of events when Mike Tyson is a convicted rapist.
Right.
How does that bother you?
Well, they would have to dig pretty deep to find anything like that against me. I'm not a convicted felon or anything like that. I mean, I've been in trouble for street fighting, basically, and every time the district attorney decides to press charges, once they delve into the case, they usually find out that it's basically somebody else starting the fight, and that I'm basically protecting myself.
The one who's finishing the fight.
Right. And usually what happens is the winner ends up getting in trouble. But usually, like I said, once they delve into the case and find out the particulars, they find out that I'm basically just protecting myself. I mean, the way I look at myself is this. I'm not a bully in the sense that I go around and impose my will upon other people. I'm just the kind of guy that just won't say no. I'm like the bully's bully, if you will. I find the guys in the bars that are trying to push their weight around and kind of gravitate into their sphere, and when they bump into me, then I think they find what they're looking for until they're leaving in an ambulance.
How often does this happen? I've heard a lot of stories. In fact, I heard of you probably about a year before you were even involved in UFC. And then I remember seeing your name, and I thought back to a couple of people I talked to in California, and they told me about David Abbott a long time before UFC.
Right. Well, I've been fighting for a long time. I don't know. I've been in a lot of street fights, obviously to the point where it's only a guesstimate, and I would say probably over 200. But I just got in a little scuffle about a week and a half ago. No, this seems to find my way.
Has there ever been any times where you couldn't get up or couldn't leave or walk out on your own feet?
No, actually not. But I've been beaten up before, but that's usually by more than one person.
A lot of people criticized you about the Dan Severn match, but you got right back off your feet and walked out of the octagon.
Right. Reference to that, there was a couple things that worked in that fight, and what was one thing is when you get trapped up against the fence and the bottom of the mat there, it's a pretty precarious place to be. I mean, you're between a rock and a hard spot.
Yeah.
And if Dan was in fact as good as I gave him credit for, he would have been able to choke me out if I would have got up. I gave him too much respect. In retrospect, I don't think he could have choked me out, and I should have got up. But at the same token, another situation that entered the story there would be that they told me that if it went on the ground for, a couple minutes, 3 minutes or so, that they were going to put us back up on our feet. Obviously, John never did. I guess he said that Dan was working, I guess it's kind of an objective, or on John's behalf, a subjective point of view, saying he was working, but what kind of effect was he having? What kind of damage was he having? He really wasn't doing anything. I was laughing at him and going, "Come on, Dan, you can hit harder than that." And, basically that was that. And then another part of the equation is that I believe Dan was playing it safe and riding the time, knowing that he only had to last 18 minutes and slap me in the back of the head till, 18 minutes was up.
Yeah, what if the time would have went, say, 40 minutes or so? Do you think?
I would have been able to get away from Dan, and I did in the end. And I think his gas was pretty much. I would have loved to have fought him for 40 minutes. Obviously, as Gracie said, there shouldn't be any time limits, but unfortunately, it can't be that way. It just can't.
Did you condition any different for the ultimate than the past? I know she lost quite a bit of weight.
Yeah, well, what I did is I actually did train with Mark Schultz, who's an Olympic and world champion wrestler, up in Provo, Utah, which is relatively close to the same altitude as Denver. And basically, just boils down to the fact that I was up there running, and I was used to the altitude, and it didn't do me any good though. I don't think I'll train like that anymore.
Going back to the old tank?
You got it.
Uh-oh.
Cocktails and bars.
A lot of people look at you, and I'm talking to you right now, and you seem like a very, very intelligent person. A lot of people look at you as the big bully. And you have went to college, and you do have a degree.
Right.
What do you think about people who think that Tank's just a big bully?
Yeah, that doesn't matter to me. If I were worried about what people thought about me, usually 90% of the time they're wrong. I would, go crazy. I don't really care. I mean, they can think what they want to think. If they think I'm a bully, the most things that I hear is that I'm just a big, strong bully. But the fact of the matter is, everybody wants to get in the octagon. No one forces anybody to go in there and fight me. And, hey, you accept the consequences that happen to you when you're in there, just like you do in the street. That's the big problem with fighting in the street, is these people pick fights. And like I said, when they leave in an ambulance, they cry something like, "Oh, well, this wasn't supposed to happen." But if it was turned around the other way,
they'd be talking about it.
Yeah, it was like, "Oh, isn't that great?" But once they get it handed to them, "Oh, that shouldn't happen to me."
But if you weren't fighting Or you didn't? If you weren't a fighter, what do you think you'd be?
I don't know. I've always just been a fighter my whole life. I mean, my father's a football coach, and ever since I was knee-high to a grasshopper, I've always been around a football field, but I never really gravitated towards that. I mean, I played football, and I quite possibly could play at a very high level of football, but it just didn't grab me, you know. I started wrestling when I was 9, and I haven't stopped.
I've heard, I used to be involved with pro wrestling somewhat, and I heard that WCW had approached you about something. I guess about 6 months or so ago.
They didn't approach me. They had a show right after the first show.
Yeah.
It was Bash on the Beach.
Mm-hmm.
Was right after Ultimate 6, and it was in my hometown. So I went down there and talked to them, and met Zane. I forget his last name, but just met them all and talked to them. Nothing serious.
What kind of other? Obviously, being in the Ultimate Fighting Championship would bring you a lot of offers or things like that. Has anything been shown to you that interests you?
They rein in, I'll tell you that, but I don't know so much that that's my motivation right now. You know, it's not like all these people, how do I say, what I heard that really rang true, it's about 2 weeks ago, this guy called me up, and he was doing a story, and he asked me, you know, you're a fighter. He goes, well, what else do you consider yourself? What's your aspirations? You know, what's going on? And I said, I don't know. I'm just a fighter. You know, this is just the way it is. You know, I'm a warrior. If I was living 500 years ago, I'd be on the front of the ship, you know, raping and pillaging everywhere I went. But I told the guy, I don't know. And he goes, well, that's very funny. He goes, I talked to everybody else in the UFC, and he goes, the second sentence that comes out of their mouth is that they want to be an actor or a movie star. And I go, yeah, well, if it comes along, it comes along. I go, but that's not what I'm here for. And when I sat down, I hung the phone up, and I started thinking about it. And I would say a lot of the fighters are actually just actors first, and they're fighting to become even more of an actor. If that makes any sense to you.
Yeah, just this week I heard Chemo landed a part in a Christian movie, and Horion Gracie got a part in the movie. Then Oleg's working on some B movie called Total Force. That's 3 people right there.
Exactly. I mean, so, and if you run down the whole gamut of who you just talked about, I mean, those guys use fighting as a stepping stone for something else.
Mm-hmm.
Where to me, like I've always said, it's just who I am.
Now, before I forget, it's just popped into my head. I wanted to know, in your words, what happened between you and Pat Smith and the infamous elevator incident.
Well, let's see. Pat Smith's a very boisterous kind of guy, a loudmouth person, and I would say if he was half as good as he talked, he'd probably win a few fights in the UFC. But he was after the Matua fight, he started going crazy and yelling all sorts of things and vice versa. And the 2 entourages, his and mine, started fighting. And in the midst of all that, he ended up punching Paul Herrera, who got knocked out by Goodbridge. Mm-hmm. Or whatever the guy is, Goodridge, or that started a little thing because Paul's like, okay, I'm not going to forget that. And then they ran in at the cocktail party, and Pat Smith was flapping about him then. And then they ran into him at a party at the hotel, and he started it up with them. And Paul goes, that's it, I'm going to get him tomorrow when we go down. we go down, and lo and behold, I'm talking to Timac at the time. The elevator opens up, and we walk out, and Pat Smith's there. He took his hands out of his pockets and was like, come on. And as everybody knows, Pat Smith's got a glass jaw. Pat Smith jacked him, or not jacked him, Paul jacked up Pat Smith. He fell down on the ground. He jumped on him and beat on him pretty good and sent him to the hospital. And that would be the most thorough account of what happened. Nothing more, nothing less.
What do you think about Paul? Do you think he just got... He was one of the guys that I picked to advance. And
yeah, he just got caught, you know. Shit happens. I don't know. I think he got caught, but at the same token, if you look at it, it looks like the Good Wrench or whatever his name is, looked like he kind of had that planned. So, you know, Paul played it a little on the safe side, laying on top of him for a little too long. You can't. That might work in wrestling, but it's not in a street fight. You can't be stationary for too long. Run into trouble like you did.
Is there anyone else in your camp that's training for UFC?
No, not at all. Matter of fact.
Okay. Is there anything you'd like to say to all the readers, maybe some of the Tank supporters and Tank haters out there?
Keep on thinking what you want to think, I guess. I don't lose any sleep over what anybody thinks, good or bad.
Okay, I want to thank you a lot for taking time out to do this. I really appreciate it.
Oh yeah, no worries.
Okay. I need